My girlfriend's stalker ex has been the villain of our relationship for 5 years. The PI just reported that the ex doesn't exist. His name was Ben. He was the ghost that haunted our home, the third person in our relationship, the jagged, broken piece of my girlfriend Chloe's past that refused to be swept away. For 5 years, Ben was the source of our deepest anxieties and, in a twisted way, the catalyst for our greatest moments of unity. He was the dragon I was constantly slaying for my princess. He was the darkness that made my love for her feel like a protective, shining light. And he was a complete and utter fiction. I just didn't know it yet. I met Chloe on a rainy Tuesday at an art gallery. She was beautiful, with wide, expressive eyes that seemed to hold a story she was scared to tell. I learned that story over the next few months. She had just escaped a relationship with Ben, a man she described as possessive, manipulative, and obsessive. He couldn't accept that it was over. Their breakup wasn't a clean break. It was a constant, low-grade haunting. For the first year, it was just texts, an endless stream of pathetic, pleading, and then menacing messages from a blocked number she knew was him. I would hold her as she cried, my heart filling with a righteous, protective fury. I was her safe harbor, the man who would never be Ben. In year 2, it escalated. A single, perfect rose left on her car windshield in the middle of the night. It seemed romantic until you realized it was a violation, a sign that he was always watching. Then came the hang-up calls to our apartment, always in the dead of night, the only sound on the other end a faint, chilling breath before the click of disconnection. We changed our numbers. He somehow got the new ones. Year 3 was the vandalism, a deep, cruel scratch down the side of my car with the word mine, a rock through our living room window with a note tied to it, I see you. We filed police reports. Without proof, without a face, Ben was just a ghost on paper. The police were sympathetic but useless. Each incident pushed us closer together. We were a team, a fortress of two against the persistent siege of her past. By year 5, we were exhausted. Ben's tactics had become more insidious, more psychological. Anonymous emails sent to her boss hinting she was unstable. A package delivered to our door containing a single dead bird. We lived with our curtains drawn, jumping at every unexpected noise. The fear was a constant, humming presence in our lives. It was the background radiation of our love story. I loved Chloe more than anything, and I hated Ben with a passion that felt like a physical thing, a hot coal in my gut. But the fear was taking its toll. Chloe was a wreck, prone to panic attacks, her beautiful, expressive eyes now constantly clouded with anxiety. I felt a creeping sense of helplessness. We had built our fortress, but the ghost was still getting in. Last month, after we found our tire slashed for the second time, I decided enough was enough. The police were at dead end. We had to take matters into our own hands. I told Chloe I was going to do something she had always been too afraid to do. I was going to hire a private investigator. I wanted a face. I wanted a legal, documented trail. I wanted to drag this ghost out of the shadows and into the harsh, unforgiving light of a courtroom. I wanted a restraining order that would stick. Chloe was hesitant at first, her fear palpable. She worried it would provoke him, but I was firm. I told her I couldn't live like this anymore, watching the man who had hurt her continue to terrorize her from afar. I needed to protect her. Seeing the determination in my eyes, she finally, tearfully agreed. It felt like a turning point, a final decisive battle in a 5-year war. I found a PI named Morales, a grizzled ex-cop with tired eyes and an office that smelled of stale coffee and cynicism. I sat in his worn leather chair and laid out the whole sordid story. I showed him the pictures of the vandalism, the screenshots of the block number texts, the police report numbers. I gave him Ben's full name, Benjamin Carter, and his last known address. Morales listened patiently, taking few notes, his expression unreadable. When I was finished, he leaned back in his squeaky chair and looked at me for a long time. "I'll look into it," he said, his voice a low gravel. "Give me a week." That was yesterday. Today, he called me. His voice on the phone was different. It lacked the professional detachment from our first meeting. It was cautious. "I'm finished," he said. "You need to come to my office, and you need to come alone." The drive to Morales' office was a slow-motion crawl through a city that seemed oblivious to the seismic shift happening in my life. The instruction to come alone echoed in my head, a dissonant chord in the symphony of our united front. For 5 years, every decision, every reaction to the threat of Ben was a we thing. We should call the police. We need to be more careful. For the first time, I was an I, and it felt like a betrayal. I told Chloe I had a last-minute meeting at work, a lie that felt clumsy and sour on my tongue. The real reason was a gnawing, protective instinct I couldn't explain. I needed to hear whatever Morales had to say before it reached her. I was the gatekeeper, the shield. It was my job. Morales' office was even dingier in the late afternoon light, dust motes dancing in the single beam of sun slanting through the grimy window. He didn't rise as I entered. He just gestured to the worn leather chair I had sat in a week ago, a lifetime ago. A manila folder sat on the desk between us. It looked thin, almost empty. "Find him," I asked, my voice tight with anticipation, my hands gripping the arms of the chair. I was ready for the details, for the address, for the grainy surveillance photos of the monster who had tormented us. Morales didn't open the folder. He tented his fingers and looked at me with those tired, seen-it-all eyes. "I'm going to be direct with you, kid," he said, his voice low. "There is no Benjamin Carter." I stared at him, the words not computing. "What do you mean? Of course there is. I gave you his name, his old address." "I know what you gave me," Morales interrupted, his voice patient but firm. "I ran the name. Benjamin Carter. I ran every possible variation. I checked DMV records, credit histories, social security databases, criminal records, voting records, property deeds, everything, going back 30 years. A man by that name, with the biographical details Chloe gave you, does not exist. He has never existed." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. "That's impossible," I stammered. "He was her boyfriend. For years. She lived with him." Morales finally opened the thin folder. He slid a single piece of paper across the desk. It was a property record printout. "This is the last known address you gave me, the apartment she lived in before she met you. I pulled the rental agreements for the 5 years prior to her moving out. She was the sole lessee. There was no cosigner, no roommate listed, no Benjamin Carter." I looked at the paper, the black and white text blurring into meaningless symbols. My mind was scrambling, trying to build a bridge across the chasm that had just opened up in my reality. I said he paid in cash, the words sounding desperate even to my own ears. He was off the books. He was controlling. He wouldn't want his name on a lease. "I thought of that," Morales said, his gaze steady, almost pitying. "I spoke to the building supervisor, an old-timer who's been there for 20 years. Knows everyone. I showed him a picture of Chloe. He remembers her well. Said she was a nice, quiet girl. Always paid her rent on time. Lived alone. Always lived alone." A cold dread, heavier and more terrifying than any fear of a stalker, began to creep up my spine. Every defensive explanation I could muster was being systematically dismantled by his quiet, relentless facts. Morales continued, his voice softer now. "I looked at the police reports you filed, the vandalism, the slashed tires. In every case, there were no witnesses, no security camera footage. The first incident, the scratch on your car, the report notes it happened in a busy parking garage in the middle of the day, a garage with multiple cameras. But the official police finding states that every single camera on that level was mysteriously malfunctioning during the hour the incident occurred." He slid another paper across the desk. It was a screenshot from a social media page. It showed a generic, smiling man. "I did find one Ben Carter connected to her, on an old, barely used social media profile of hers from 7 years ago. He's a friend. They had a few public, harmless interactions. He's a real person. He lives in Portland, Oregon. He's married, has 2 kids, and works as a landscape architect. He hasn't been in this state in over a decade." The picture. This was the man whose face I had seen in my mind's eye every time I thought of Ben. Chloe had shown me his picture once, early on, from this very profile. The face of the monster. A landscape architect from Portland. A father of 2. "The texts from the block number," Morales went on, his voice a relentless drumbeat of truth. "They come from a burner phone, as expected, but the phone's signal pings off a cell tower. For the last 5 years, Every single text, every hang-up call you've ever received from Ben has come from a signal that pinged off the cell tower closest to your physical location. When you were at home, it came from the tower a block from your apartment. When you were at your office, it pinged from the tower across the street. The calls weren't coming from a stalker hiding in the shadows. The calls were coming from inside the house. He leaned forward, his tired eyes holding mine, leaving no room for escape. Your girlfriend doesn't have a stalker, kid. She never has. He paused, letting the weight of his final words settle into the silent, dusty office. She's the one who scratched your car. She's the one who threw the rock. She's the one who's been sending the texts and making the calls. There is no dragon. The princess has been setting the fires herself. Leaving Morales' office was like stepping into a different dimension. The city looked the same, the sounds of traffic were the same, but I was fundamentally altered. I was a tuning fork that had been struck, and the vibration of his words resonated through every cell in my body, shaking the very foundations of my memory and identity. I drove home on autopilot, my mind a chaotic slideshow of the last 5 years. Every memory, once a cornerstone of our shared struggle, was now a crime scene. The single rose on the windshield, I saw Chloe's hand placing it there, her face a mask of feigned terror. The rock through our window, I pictured her in the darkness of our own backyard, tying on the note before hurling it into the life we had built. The late-night calls, I imagined her in the other room or even lying next to me in bed, her face illuminated by the faint glow of a second secret phone, whispering breaths into the receiver before hanging up. The villain of our story wasn't a shadowy ex. It was the woman I loved. The monster wasn't at the gate. It was sleeping in my bed. Why? The question was a physical, agonizing force inside me. Why would she do this? Why would she invent a monster and then spend 5 years fighting it? Was it a cry for help? A mental illness I had been too blind to see?
Or was it something more sinister? Was I the target? Had this all been a twisted, elaborate form of manipulation? A way to keep me close? To keep me playing the role of the protector? My love for her, which had felt so pure and noble, now seemed like a construct. An emotional response engineered by her manufactured chaos. She had created the disease so she could sell me the cure. Her love, our unity, our us against the world bond. It was the most profound, most violating betrayal I could imagine. It wasn't just an affair, a lie about money, or a hidden past. She had lied about our present. She had falsified the very reality we inhabited together. When I got home, she was in the kitchen, humming softly to the radio as she chopped vegetables for dinner. The scene was so painfully normal, so achingly domestic, it felt like a deliberate, cruel parody. She looked up and smiled as I walked in, the same warm, loving smile that had been my sanctuary for 5 years. Today it looked like a mask. "Hey, you're back early," she said, her voice bright. "How was the meeting?" "It was informative," I said, my own voice sounding hollow and distant. I looked at her, truly looked at her, searching for a crack in the facade. I saw nothing. Just the woman I loved, standing in our kitchen, making our dinner. But I saw her with new eyes. I saw the strength in her arms not as a sign of her resilience, but the strength needed to slash a tire. I saw the intelligence in her eyes, not as the wit I adored, in which I saw the cunning required to maintain a 5-year lie. She must have sensed the shift in my demeanor. Her smile faltered slightly. "Is everything okay? You seem off." "I'm fine," I lied, the word tasting like poison. "Just tired." For the rest of the evening, I was an actor. I sat at the dinner table, eating the food she had prepared, listening to her talk about her day and nodding in all the right places. But I was gone. I was hovering somewhere near the ceiling, watching a stranger play my part opposite the woman who had written the script. I felt a terrifying, icy calm settle over me. The initial shock was giving way to a cold, clinical need for proof. Morales' report was one thing. I needed to see it for myself. I needed to catch the ghost in the act. We went to bed, our bodies falling into their familiar places on either side of the mattress. She curled up against me, her head on my chest, a gesture of trust and intimacy that now felt like a violation. I lay there rigid in the darkness, my arm around a stranger. I didn't sleep. I waited. Around 2 a.m. it happened. I felt a subtle shift in her weight as she carefully, quietly, slipped her arm from under my head. I kept my breathing even, my eyes closed, feigning deep sleep. I heard a faint rustle as she reached for something on her nightstand, then a barely audible click. I knew, with a sickening certainty, that she had just turned on the burner phone. I lay there, a prisoner in my own bed, every muscle tensed. What would it be this time? A text? A call? A part of me wanted to leap up, to turn on the light and confront her, to scream, "I know!" in her face. But my new, cold, analytical self held me back. I had to see the play through to its final act. A moment later, I felt the faintest vibration from my own phone, which was on my nightstand a few feet away. One single, silent pulse. It was the notification of a new text message. I knew without looking what it would say. It would be from a blocked number. It would be a threat, a plea, a single word designed to keep the story alive. It would be a message from Ben. It would be a message from the woman lying silently beside me in the dark. The ghost was in the room, and she was holding me in her arms.
The next morning, the world was painted in shades of unreality. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the bedroom where I had lain awake all night, a silent witness to my own betrayal. Chloe was already up. The scent of coffee, a cheerful, insulting lie wafting from the kitchen. My phone was on the nightstand. I picked it up, my thumb hovering over the screen, my heart a dull, heavy metronome in my chest. I already knew what I would find, but the act of looking felt like a final, irreversible step into the abyss. I opened my messages. There it was. A new text from a blocked number, received at 2:13 a.m. The message was a single, chilling sentence. You can't protect her forever. I stared at the words. The same words that would have sent a jolt of protective fury through me just 2 days ago. Now they were just props in a pathetic one-woman show. I imagined Chloe typing them out in the dark, her face illuminated by the screen, carefully crafting the voice of the villain she had created. The sheer, calculated audacity of it was breathtaking. She was the arsonist and the firefighter, the saboteur and the victim all at once. I walked into the kitchen, my phone in my hand. She was at the counter, her back to me, pouring coffee into her favorite mug, a bright yellow one I had bought her, ironically, to bring a little sunshine into her life. "Morning," she said, her voice bright and chipper, a stark contrast to the darkness of the text message she had sent just hours before. "Sleep okay?" "Not really," I said, my voice flat. I watched her for any flicker of a reaction, any sign of guilt or fear. There was nothing. Her composure was absolute. She was a master of her craft. "Oh no, why?" she asked, turning around, her face a mask of wifely concern. I held up my phone, turning the screen so she could see the message. We got another one. Her performance was flawless. Her eyes widened, her hand flew to her mouth in a gesture of practiced horror. She took the phone from my hand, her own trembling slightly for effect. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He's getting bolder." She looked up at me, her eyes welling with manufactured tears. "What are we going to do, Mark? I can't live like this." In that moment, watching her, I didn't feel rage. I felt a profound, bottomless pity. This was her life. This constant, exhausting performance. She had built a prison of lies and then willingly locked herself inside it. Her entire identity, her relationship with me, her very sense of self was built on this fiction. Without Ben, who was she? Just a normal woman, living a normal life. And for some reason, that was a fate she considered worse than this elaborate, terrifying charade. I don't know, I said, taking the phone back. The cold, analytical part of my brain took over again. Confrontation would be pointless. She was too deep in the lie. She would just deny it, twist it, call me crazy. She would make me the villain. No, I couldn't just tell her I knew. I had to show her. I needed irrefutable, undeniable proof. I needed to trap the ghost in a way she couldn't escape. The plan began to form in my mind, cold and precise. It was a terrible, cruel idea, but her deception had left me no other choice. I was going to use the very tools of her fiction to dismantle it. You know what? I said, my voice shifting, becoming the protective, determined boyfriend she had created. You're right. We can't live like this. He's not going to stop. So we're going to stop him. Hope flickered in her eyes. What do you mean? I mean, we're going to catch him in the act, I said. The words tasted like ash. I'm going to install security cameras, high-definition night vision cameras. One pointing at the front door, one at the back, and one pointing at my car. The next time he tries something, we're going to get his face. We're going to have undeniable proof, and we're going to put him away for good. Her reaction was a masterpiece of conflicting emotions. A flicker of something. Was it panic? Fear? Flashed in her eyes so quickly I almost missed it. But it was immediately replaced by a profound relief and gratitude. She threw her arms around my neck, burying her face in my shoulder. "Oh, Mark," she sobbed. "Really? You'd do that? For me?" "Of course I would," I said, my arms hanging limply at my sides, before I forced myself to wrap them around her. I held her, feeling the vibrations of her fake sobs, and I felt like Judas. I was comforting the woman I was about to destroy. For the first time, I was lying to her. I was creating a fiction of my own, a trap disguised as an act of love. The poison she had been feeding me for 5 years was now in my own veins, and I was about to inject it right back into her. I was no longer just a character in her play. I had just become a co-writer, and I was about to write the final tragic scene. The next 2 days were the most surreal of my life. I became a man possessed by a secret project, and Chloe, my unwitting adversary, became my biggest cheerleader. I bought the security camera system online, choosing a top-of-the-line model with all the features I'd promised. When the box arrived, she treated it like a holy relic, a symbol of our impending salvation. She watched, her face a mask of earnest support, as I spent a Saturday on a stepladder drilling holes and running wires. "A little to the left," she'd say, directing my placement of the camera pointed at my car. "I want to make sure we get a clear shot of his face when he comes back." The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. She was art directing the scene of her own unmasking. Each screw I drove into the wall felt like a nail in the coffin of our relationship. I was building a stage, and she was helping me, completely unaware that she was the star of a tragedy. My hands were steady, my movements precise, but inside I was a wreck. I felt like a bomb disposal expert, carefully setting up a device that I knew was going to detonate, taking everything I'd ever loved with it. There was, however, a critical piece of my plan that I kept from her. I had bought a 4-camera system. I installed the 3 I had told her about, front door, back door, my car. The 4th camera was smaller, wireless, and designed to be hidden. It was a nanny cam. While she was out getting groceries, her final contribution to the weekend's project, I installed it in our bedroom. I tucked it into a bookshelf between a stack of novels and a small ceramic bird she loved. It had a perfect, unobstructed view of her side of the bed and her nightstand. That night, there was a new energy in the apartment. It was the electric hum of anticipation. Chloe was almost giddy.
her relief palpable. She saw the cameras as an end to her terror, a final checkmate in a long and punishing game. She made a special dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and toasted to our new beginning. To finally being free of him, she said, her eyes shining as she clinked her glass against mine. I drank the wine, the toast a bitter acid in my stomach. I was toasting to the end of us. As we got ready for bed, her optimism was infectious, and for a terrifying moment, I almost believed in it myself. I almost confessed. I almost grabbed her and told her I knew everything, that we could get help, that we could fix this. But then I looked at her, at the 5 years of intricate, calculated deception living behind her loving eyes, and I knew it was too late.
The lie wasn't a part of her. It had consumed her. To save myself, I had to expose the fiction, no matter how much it hurt. We lay in bed, the small, nearly invisible lens of the fourth camera watching over us from the bookshelf. Chloe fell asleep almost instantly, a deep, peaceful sleep of someone who believes their nightmare is finally over. I did not sleep. I lay awake, my eyes open in the darkness, and I waited. My phone was on my nightstand, connected to the live feed of the cameras. I was no longer just a participant in this drama. I was the audience, the director, and the executioner all at once. The hours ticked by. 1 o'clock. 2 o'clock. My own exhaustion was a heavy weight, and my resolve began to waver. Maybe she wouldn't do it. Maybe the presence of the cameras was enough of a deterrent. Maybe, just maybe, this long night would end in a quiet, anticlimactic peace. And then, at 2:47 a.m., it began. On my phone screen, I watched the grainy black and white feed from the bedroom. I saw her stir, the same subtle shift of weight I had felt the other night. She sat up slowly, a dark silhouette in the infrared light. She looked at my sleeping form for a long moment, ensuring I was truly asleep. Then she reached into her nightstand drawer. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the ghost materializing on screen. She pulled out the burner phone. The small screen lit up her face, casting her in a ghostly, demonic glow. I could see her features clearly, the focused, determined set of her jaw, the complete absence of fear or anxiety. This was not a victim. This was a professional at work. Her thumbs began to move, a blur of activity as she composed her message. I knew that in a moment, my own phone would vibrate with the poison she was typing. But that wasn't the main event. The trap was set for a bigger prize. She put the phone down, then swung her legs out of bed. She stood up, her movements silent and fluid. She crept out of the bedroom, closing the door behind her with a barely audible click. My breath hitched. I immediately switched the feed on my phone to the camera pointed at my car. The screen showed the quiet, empty street illuminated by a single streetlight. It was a placid, peaceful scene. And then, a figure entered the frame from the side of the house. It was Chloe. She was wearing a dark hoodie, the hood pulled up to obscure her face, but it was unmistakably her. In her gloved hand, she held a long, sharp object. It glinted in the streetlight. It was an ice pick. She approached my car, her movements quick and furtive. She looked around, checking the empty street, before crouching down by the front passenger side tire. She raised the ice pick and then plunged it into the tire's sidewall. The sound was a dull, satisfying thud, followed by a loud hissing sigh as the air rushed out. The sight of it, the cold, undeniable, high-definition proof of her betrayal, was so shocking, so monstrous that I felt the air rush out of my own lungs. The show was over. The ghost had been caught on film, and my world had just ended. I didn't move. I lay in bed, the phone clutched in my hand, replaying the silent black and white footage of the woman I loved vandalizing my life. The hissing of the tire was a sound only I could hear, a phantom echo in the silent bedroom. I watched as she calmly punctured the second tire, her movements efficient, practiced. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a routine. It was just another scene in her long-running production. She disappeared from the frame, and a minute later, the bedroom door opened softly. She slipped back into the room, a shadow returning to its place. I watched her hide the hoodie and the ice pick in a gym bag in the bottom of her closet. She slipped the burner phone back into its drawer. Then she got back into bed, her movements as quiet and deliberate as when she had left.
She curled up, facing away from me, and within minutes, her breathing settled into the slow, even rhythm of sleep. Sleep. The idea was a cosmic joke. My mind was a supernova of rage, grief, and a chilling, hollow clarity. The love I had felt for her, which had been the bedrock of my world, was being systematically dismantled, memory by the incontrovertible proof on my phone. The woman sleeping peacefully beside me was a stranger, a master manipulator, a psychological terrorist who had made me her sole audience. The urge to shake her awake, to hold the phone in her face and scream was a physical force I had to fight to control. But what would that accomplish? More tears, more lies, more performance. She would find a way to twist it, to make me the villain for spying on her. I knew her now. Her fictions were more real to her than any truth. A simple confrontation was an unworthy ending to a 5-year epic of deceit. She didn't deserve a messy, emotional screaming match. She deserved a quiet, clinical, soul-crushing finale. She deserved to be confronted not by my rage, but by the cold, hard reality she had tried so desperately to escape. I waited until the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains. Then I got out of bed, my movements robotic. I got dressed, my mind a blank, focused void. I went into the kitchen and made coffee, the familiar routine a strange comfort in a world turned upside down. Chloe came out a few minutes later, yawning and stretching, the picture of innocence. "Morning," she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. "Morning," I replied, my voice even. I handed her a cup of coffee. Our hands brushed, and I felt a jolt of revulsion so strong I almost dropped the mug. I let the charade play out for another hour. We sat in the living room, sipping our coffee, the morning news a meaningless drone in the background. She was waiting for me to discover the tires, for the next scene to begin. I could feel her anticipation, a low thrum of energy under her calm exterior. She was an actress waiting for her cue. Finally, I stood up. "Well, I should get going. I have that early meeting." "Okay, honey," she said, her voice laced with a subtle, feigned nervousness. "Be careful." "Always am." I grabbed my keys and walked out the front door, closing it softly behind me. I knew she was watching from the window, waiting for the performance to start. I walked to my car. I stopped. I stared at the 2 flat tires. The passenger side of the car slumped in defeat. I put my hands on my hips, shaking my head in a perfect pantomime of disbelief and frustration. I kicked one of the flat tires. Then I looked around, my eyes scanning the street, the trees, the neighboring houses, playing the part of the victim searching for his tormentor. Then I looked directly up at the security camera I'd installed above the garage. I pointed at the tires, then pointed at the camera, a clear, deliberate gesture. "Gotcha," I mouthed to the lens, a silent message to the man I thought I was catching. I pulled out my phone. I saw Chloe's silhouette in the living room window, watching my every move. She thought I was calling the police. She thought the next act of our drama was about to begin, with me as the furious protector and her as the terrified victim. But I didn't call the police. I opened the security camera app. I went to the recorded footage from the night before. I downloaded the clip from the bedroom camera, the one of her getting out of bed and taking out the burner phone. Then I downloaded the clip from the garage camera, the one of her, cloaked in a hoodie, plunging the ice pick into my tires. I selected both video files. My thumb hovered over the share button. My heart was pounding, a funeral drum for the life we had shared. This was it, the final, irreversible act. I took a deep breath. I hit share. I selected her contact, and I pressed send, and watched the progress bar fill. A moment later, my phone buzzed with a delivered notification. I looked up at the window. I could still see her silhouette. I imagined her phone buzzing in her hand, her brow furrowing in confusion as she saw a video message from me. I pictured her tapping play. I watched as her silhouette went rigid. She didn't move for a long, frozen moment. Then she slowly, deliberately, stepped back from the window, disappearing into the darkness of the house. The show was over. The ghost had been seen, and the theater was about to go dark. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The street was quiet. The morning birds were chirping. But in my world, there was only a deafening, ringing void. I stood by my crippled car, my phone in my hand, feeling like I had just pressed the button on a detonator. I had sent the proof. The unmasking was complete. I had expected a reaction, a scream,
the sound of something breaking, the front door flying open. But there was nothing, just a profound, unnerving stillness from within the house. I didn't know what to do. My plan had ended with the send button. I hadn't thought about the aftermath, about what came next. Do I walk back in? Do I call her? Do I just leave? Every option felt wrong, inadequate. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text from Chloe. My blood ran cold. My fingers trembled as I opened the message, my mind bracing for a torrent of rage, denial, or pathetic excuses. But it was none of those things. It was a single, horrifyingly calm sentence. The back door is open. That was it. No explanation, no emotion, just a simple, factual statement. It was an invitation, but it felt like a summons. It was the most terrifying message I had ever received. The ghost wasn't running. She was waiting for me. My feet felt like lead, but some morbid, inescapable gravity pulled me forward. I walked down the driveway, my steps echoing in the quiet morning. I went through the side gate and into our small backyard, the yard where we'd hosted barbecues, where we'd planted a small, struggling herb garden. Every familiar detail was now alien, a set piece from a life that had never been real. The back door was, as she'd said, ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The house was dark. She had drawn all the curtains, plunging the familiar space into a gloomy twilight. The air was thick and still. My eyes adjusted slowly, and I saw her. She was sitting at the dining room table, the table where we had shared hundreds of meals, where we had laughed and planned our future. She was not crying. She was not hysterical. She was perfectly still, her hands folded neatly on the table in front of her. On the table, arranged in a neat, orderly line, were the props from her long-running play. The burner phone, the ice pick, the dark hoodie now folded into a perfect square. It was a curated confession, a museum exhibit of her deceit. She was looking down at her hands, her face unreadable. I stopped a few feet away from the table, my heart pounding a frantic, unsteady rhythm. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken words, with 5 years of lies. Finally, she looked up at me. Her eyes were not the eyes of the terrified victim or the loving girlfriend. They were the eyes of a stranger, calm, empty, and deeply, deeply tired. The mask was gone. The actress had left the stage, and the person left behind was a hollowed-out shell. "So," she said, her voice a flat, emotionless monotone, "you know, it wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact." "I know," I replied, my own voice barely a whisper. "Are you going to call the police?" she asked, her gaze unwavering. There was no fear in her question, only a quiet, clinical curiosity. It was as if she was asking if I wanted sugar in my coffee. The question caught me off guard. The police, the law, it all seemed so small, so inadequate to address the scale of this betrayal. A restraining order? A charge for vandalism. It was like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. The real crime, the psychological demolition of my life, wasn't something you could write on a police report. "I don't know," I answered honestly. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if she had expected that answer. She looked back down at her folded hands. "Why?" I asked, the word a raw, open wound in the silent room. "Why would you do all this, Chloe? Why would you do this to me? To us?" She was silent for a long time. I thought she wasn't going to answer, but then she took a deep, shuddering breath, the first sign of any emotion I had seen. "Because the quiet is so loud," she whispered, her voice so soft I could barely hear it. "When there's no story, when there's no monster, there's just silence. and I don't know who I am in the silence." She looked up at me again, and for the first time I saw a flicker of the woman I thought I knew, a glimmer of profound, devastating pain. "Before you," she said, her voice cracking, "the story was just for me. Ben was my ghost. He was the reason my life was the way it was, the reason I couldn't be normal. He was my excuse, but it was lonely, being the only one in the story. And then I met you, and you were so good, so kind. You believed me. You wanted to protect me. And for the first time, the story felt real. The monster felt real because you were there to fight him. Our love felt real because it was forged in the fire of this fake danger. It was the only way I knew how to feel safe, by being in constant danger." She finally broke. A single tear traced the path down her cheek. "I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it because I didn't want to be alone in the quiet. And now, I think the quiet is all I have left." Her confession hung in the dim, heavy air of the dining room. It wasn't an apology. It was an explanation, a glimpse into the broken, terrified logic that had governed her world, and, by extension, mine. She wasn't a monster. She was a storyteller who had become so lost in her own fiction that she couldn't find her way back to reality. The silence she feared so much was the normal, everyday peace that most people craved. To her, it was an empty stage, a terrifying void. I looked at the woman before me, the props of her deception laid out like a final offering, and the rage that had been my fuel for days finally sputtered and died. All that was left was a profound, cavernous sadness. A sadness for the man I had been, who had loved so blindly and so completely. A sadness for the woman she could have been if she hadn't been so afraid of the quiet. And a sadness for the us that never truly existed. A beautiful, compelling ghost story we had told each other. There was nothing left to say. There would be no dramatic conclusion, no screaming match, no satisfying, cinematic ending. The story was over, and it ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, mutual understanding that it was all built on sand. I didn't call the police. The thought of seeing her in handcuffs, of reducing this complex psychological tragedy to a simple crime of vandalism, felt like a betrayal of a different kind. The justice I needed wasn't something the legal system could provide. The justice was the truth. It was this moment, right here, in this dark, silent room. I took the house key from my keychain and placed it on the table, next to the ice pick. It was my final line in our shared script, a quiet, definitive, the end.
"Goodbye, Chloe," I said, the name feeling foreign in my mouth. I turned and walked away. I walked out the back door, leaving her there with the ghosts of her own making. I didn't look back. I walked down the driveway, past my wounded car, and I just kept walking. I left my car, my apartment, my life. I left it all behind. It was all part of the set, and the play was over. It's been a year. I live in a different city, a place where no one knows my story. I'm quieter now. I'm more cautious. The open, trusting man I once was is a casualty of Chloe's war against silence. I carry the scars of her fiction, and some days the quiet is loud for me too. I find myself questioning the stories people tell, looking for the narrative threads, for the heroes and villains they invent to make sense of their own lives. I never heard from her again. I don't know if she got help or if she simply packed up her props and moved to a new town to stage a new play with a new leading man. A part of me hopes she found a way to live in the quiet. But a darker, more honest part of me knows that storytellers rarely stop telling stories. They just find a new audience. The experience has left me with a question that I still can't fully answer. A question about the very nature of love and the stories we build around it. And I have to ask you, because I'm still trying to figure it out. Is a love that is built to fight a monster any less real when you discover the monster was never there to begin with.
Don't forget to like and subscribe. I post new stories every day.